Okay, welcome everyone. I am Kaya Tool Akalai. I am from West March. I'm currently Regent. I make hoods. Hoods are usually like a pretty easy thing if you've seen the Viking hoods and such. Here is one of them. This has been decorated. It's pretty simple. So we've got an opening, got a symbol on front, and this is how it's worn. This is what we're going to be making today. So it's lined. There is no inner, like right side or wrong side. So you can literally flip this inside out and have a red hood. So like any good craftspeople, we are going to review our pattern first. This is the handout that I've been posting everywhere. So this is originally a Viking hood that was found in a bog. Please don't make me pronounce this because I haven't practiced it this morning. But it's very simple. You're going to need 1.5 yards of outer fabric and 1.5 yards of lining fabric. We are going to begin by looking at, we need a sewing machine. We need your basic sewing equipment. So you need like scissors, the sewing thread, marking tools, fabric scissors, pins, etc. Okay, so we're going to begin by starting out with our cutting. And then we're going to jump into assembly. Now you only need a sewing machine that can do a straight stitch because the seams won't show. We flip this inside out and we end up using what's called a ladder stitch in order to sew up the opening. But what really makes this, really makes it look great afterwards is the ironing, because once you iron all crisp edges and everything, it will stay, and you can even, if you wanted to, go ahead and stitch the outside of it. So this is our cutting diagram. Basic cutting. Once we cut, we're going to also mark where the corner is on the front and the back square, these squares, because we're going to be piecing it together. So that means we don't need to go all the way to the inside edge, but 1/4 of an inch or whatever your seam allowance is. Doesn't matter if it's is a 1/4 inch or an inch or whatever you feel comfortable with. 1/2 inch, you just need to keep your seam allowance just accurate and consistent throughout the entirety. Okay, it's kind of magical how this goes together. I'm going to seam up the long parts together, and this is going to be the top of the hood, and then you have a front and a back, and you attach those on opposite sides, and then you flip it around and attach it to make it into a 3D object. So once you've closed up all your openings, you're then going to do the hood opening first, and it's going to, one's going to fit out inside, one hood's going to fit inside the other with the wrong side out, and we're going to do the hood opening, and then you're going to flip it kind of right side out, but the bottom part is going to be open, and you grab 2 corners and you kind of encase it together, and that will make a lot more sense once we get there. I'm going to stop after each section and ask if anyone has questions for about a minute. We're going to do Q&A, and then we're going to move on to the next step in case there was nothing that was not clear. Okay, so we're going to go over to my cutting table. If you do not have a cutting ruler and a cutting table, that's fine. You can also just mark it out with a pencil. I really recommend, amazingly, these little pens, or sorry, my camera's deciding it doesn't like the coloring. These are gel markers I like to use. This is a silver one. It washes out and it doesn't actually mark or stain any fabric. So highly recommend those. Okay.
Can you like send that to me what those pens are, because I have that problem.
It literally is a magnetic, let's see if I can get this.
Yeah,
it's literally a jelly roll. It is the actual jelly roll brand. They cost about $1 over at Joann's. They're metallic. It's nothing special. These are the ones like you used in middle school and high school to be cool.
All right, thanks.
So my fabric has already been washed and laundered. So I've got these 2 here. we are going to cut these exactly the same. So I'm going to set one aside, and I always like to cut them separately because I'm just a little worried that sometimes things won't line up. Now I've also ironed the center, and we're going to be working with the center fold towards us. Actually, you know what? Let me see. A little bit more towards me. Okay. So this is where the fold is in the fabric. This is our salvage edge over here. This is one of our torn edges. And what we're going to do is we're going to line up the folded edge with one straight line at the bottom of our sewing table. Or if you're going to just mark this out, just be very careful that all of your lines run perpendicular to the fold. That way you know you're getting two parallel lines and they're not going to be changing an angle. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure my first cut is on the edge to trim off my torn edge. I'm going to grab my directions. Remember, always measure twice, cut once. So I like working from right to left. You can work from left to right if you're more comfortable with that. You can go ahead and start off with your 215, or you can do your 18, your 18. So we're going to be looking at how wide these are. So 18 inches. 18 inches. This is going to be one of the main bodies of the hood. Let me just put that aside. Move our fabric down. Then I'm going to make sure my cut edge on one side is still lined up. So if you're brushing your fabric like I am, brush it away from the cut edge. Now, if you find that this is too big, always just, adjust the sizes as you feel comfortable with to make sure it stays consistent. So like you can do, if you're a smaller person like me, 15 in a 13 might be good. Okay, and then I'm just going to measure this last cut out. My cutting mat is not attached to my table, so I can slide it around as you see I'm doing, because it's not quite 1 yard wide. Yep, so I just made 18 and a 15. This leaves me just with a little strip left. And because I don't need that, I'm throwing it away. Okay. For now, so I'm working with my 15 inch. I'm going to cut these into a 15-inch square. So I'm just going to trim off the edge, just the salvage edge. Now, the reason I do this is because then you'll end up with a larger scrap if you cut towards the fold on the 15er. You can't do that with the 18, though. 5. Okay, so that's 2 15s. And then got this nice large scrap that you can put in your scrap bin instead of a couple of little ones. Okay. Now we're going to work with our 18ers. Now these need to be 34 inches long. So I'm going to be smart about this. Pull out my handy calculator and just double check my math. 17 inches. So we're going to go 17 inches from the fold. You'll end up with 2 smaller pieces on this side. If you really are worried about conserving fabric, you can open this up and actually measure it out. I'm not too worried. I've got a very large, healthy scrap pile, and these aren't too bad of scraps. You can use these for like felt favorites and such. First one. 15 inches. Okay, great. So we have done one color so far, 2 large body pieces, 2 size 15ths. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing to my other fabric. If you have questions right now, you may unmute yourself and ask them while I am cutting this. No questions? Good. So if you are wanting to decorate your hood with a symbol like my Assassin's Creed hood, you can just do that at this point. Sorry, that was my cat. Where you take your 15 and just go ahead and put it onto the 15. If you're wanting to do a design that spreads onto the shoulders, you are going to want to do that after you've already assembled one side of the hood. And when I mean one side, I mean the outside of the fabric. You can actually put together the front part of it and then decorate a larger design onto it and go over the seams. It's a good piece of scrap. So my blade's getting a little dull. I just got one thread that did not cut right there. Okay. So again, I'm going to start off with the 15 incher. You know, this one has a really, like, it just didn't quite match up on the bottom. So I'm not too worried about the loss of that there, but I'm going to flip it over so I can see the one with the side that's undercutting a little bit. Okay. 15 and 15. Scrap. Side. 17 is where I'm going to line up the fold and cut off the salvage edge. Bubble in here. That's fine. There we go. There we go. Okay. So that is the cutting part. Very easy, simple, straight stitch is what we're going to do next. And you're going to kind of treat this like 2 parts. We're going to sew together one side and then we're going to sew together the other side. So what's kind of nice about this is that if you think about it, you're actually learning on one and then you're going to do the actual like work on the other. So if you want to use your lining fabric, that's fine to start with. That way you kind of had an idea what's going on. Before we switch over to the sewing machine, we are going to mark off on our 15-inch pieces where we're going to sew to. And that'll make sense because once we get to the corners, you can't sew all the way and then flip it inside out without it just bunching up. So I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what I'm going to do is I have a small acrylic ruler and I'm just going to mark off an area of 2 lines that are 1/4 of an inch. And when I go to sew this in, I'm only going to sew to that line. That way I don't sew the parts that the other seam needs. This one just a little bit darker. Okay. So if you look here, let's see, right there is where it is going to connect, and we're only going to sew to that line. So we're going to do that to all 4 of these. Remember, an ounce of prep is worth so much time and aggravation. That's why we read through our directions. That is why we are making these marks, so that we kind of set ourselves up for success just by taking a moment to prep this. Okay, so cutting's all done, marking is all done. Next out, you are going to want to grab the pins. I'm just going to start pinning together the parts that are going to go together in our first run. When I mean first run, I mean the first pass at that sewing machine. We're going to pin the 2 larger parts together. Just a touch. The 2 larger parts, you're going to put their shorter sides together. That is going to be the top of your hood. Since 18 inches is kind of big, I recommend 3 to 4 pins. Again, we are taking a moment to set ourselves up for an easy sewing day. Okay, now I'm going to flip this so it is the right side of my the hood part fabric up, and I'm going to find where I marked. There we go. So when you pin this into place, you are going to pin with the corner that we marked towards the longer part. We're going to line up the bottom together. And we're going to just pin. So up here, I have where I'd already put the top of the hood and all the pins. This is the long part. Here is where I have marked off on our front panel. It's actually kind of like a gusset if you think about it. I'm going to use 3 pins to put that in. Now I'm going to rotate this. So I'm going to the opposite side of the other part of the hood. I'm going to again locate where I marked, do the same thing. So again, using 3 pins, lining it up with the long side. Okay, so that is one side. I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other side. If you have any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away. Okay, so I'm pinning together the long, large pieces together at the short side. Again, this is going to be the top of the hood. It's kind of hard to see with black on black. Go. Okay, great. Open this up. Going to add one of the gussets. lined up in the center. There we go. Again, rotate your work so you're working on the opposite side. Just pin the other side together as well. Okay, great. Now we are ready for our sewing machine. Kelly, if you could pause the recording real quick so that. Okay, I have a Brother Project Runway machine, and it's a pretty simple machine. Currently, I'm using a quilter's attachment. You don't need to use one of these. I kind of like it just because it's easier to see when I'm teaching. I'm going to adjust my needle so that it is sewing at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, as I said, you don't need to be 1/4 inch. You just need to be consistent on this. You just can't reset your machine or readjust it once you start. All of your seams have to be exactly the same inside and out so that your hoods end up the same size. And if it doesn't work out perfectly, you can kind of just adjust it as needed, but you really want to just keep it consistent. Like, you're going to be at your sewing machine for only 15 minutes. So, okay. I am going to just grab this and grab the part that presents itself to me with the pins first. So this is a front panel with the hood panel underneath. I am actually going to start with my needle at that intersection where I can see it, because right now is the time to actually visualize this and to see this. Because that, when you go the other way, you're going to really want to make sure that that's already been done, that you've already sewn to that part. So you're going to work towards the edge of the fabric. You've already pinned it in place, so you already know that's going to end at the same place. And then don't forget to back up a couple of stitches to lock your thread. I'm going to slow down and stop for a needle. Do not sew over your needles. Get to the edge. Don't forget to back up a few stitches to lock it in. Okay, so that is one side. I'm going to work my way down. I'm now going to do the top of the hood. Take my pin out. The reason I won't want to go over your pins is because you can break a needle and catch one to the eye. You can also really mess up your machine. We don't want that. Always back up after stitching.
You seem to have muted yourself.
Oh, I'm not talking while I'm sewing.
Okay, I know, but like the machine isn't even making noises. So maybe it just went, I don't know.
Give me a second.
I can hear you now when you talk. It's just weird. It didn't make it. Maybe it's just me. I'm sorry. Continue.
I think it's because I had my computer behind me. Can you hear me now?
Yes. I can hear you talk. It just, maybe it's me. I'm sorry. Continue.
It's okay. Okay. Hold on. I'm going to take some coffee now. Okay. There we go. Okay, other side. Again, we are going to start off with the corner that is marked first, because it's important that we get that line stitched correctly into the point that we need it to be. Stitch a couple of stitches, back up your stitches to lock your thread in place. Okay, we are done with one side. We're going to put that aside. We're going to grab the second side. Again, I'm just going to start with whatever pins present themselves with me. Before I do the second side, does anyone have any questions? Doing the exact same thing twice, which is kind of nice because we kind of get the jitters out the first way, and then we do the second time. No? Okay. The black is going to be my inside fabric, so I'm going to leave a 3-inch gap in my first seam of the gusset because that's how we're going to turn the entirety of this thing right side out afterwards. And if you do your ladder stitch well enough, you won't even be able to tell. Okay, I'm going to go to the top now, and I'm going to sew close the top. And you know what? I totally just talked about that gap and I didn't leave it, so we're going to go on the next side. Okay, this is the last chance for me to put in that. Actually, it's not the last chance. If you forget to put in your opening to turn in right side out, it's not the end of the world because we're going to actually attach the other gussets. I'm going to add 2 pins to it because that's going to remind me that I need to stop and do something. Sometimes when all you think is, I just have to sew a straight line, you just sew a straight line. Okay, so in order to leave a gap, what I'm going to do is sink my needle in, and I'm going to back up a few stitches. I'm going to lift my foot. I'm going to skip over about 2 to 3 inches. You don't want it too small because what will happen is you'll end up ripping open like the seam, or you can harm your fabric or warp the fabric. So like 3 inches is usually pretty good. Okay, great. So we are now to the point where we are going to wrap our fabric together. Slide that back so I have more room. Okay, so this is the top of, right. This is the top of the hood. What I'm going to do is I am going to fold the 2 long parts together and we can start seeing the shape of our hood here. I'm going to line up, here is the gusset in front. Here's the place that we marked. I'm going to go along the side, that's also the part that we marked, and line that up with a long part of the hood that has not been sewn yet. And we are going to pin that together. Now, when we do this, we are going to work from the short edge along the long side towards where we had marked, because it's important that we stop at that mark. Okay, so that's one side of our hood. I'm going to leave this side open and I'm going to pin the second side closed. So I'm going to flip this around. Going to again, marked side, pin to the other side of your long piece. So that we're now making this into a 3D object. And once I put in these pins, I am going to put the gusset in. I'm then going to put a pin into the hood. And we're actually going to, when we sew, we're going to sew up the short part. And then we're going to actually pull this away and put our needle in where it joins together on the other side. That way, this is all going to be one free space. You don't want to, I have found through trial and error, you don't want to just keep sewing because it can create puckering when you turn this right side out. And it looks really, you'll never get it to sit right, honestly. So just when we get to that part, we're just going to pick up our needle and we're just going to finish sewing. Okay. Remember how I said that sometimes these can be wonky. If for some reason this is not lining up properly, like you have like this, instead of being all nice and straight and flat, but it has a little bit of a over curve, like you've got too much fabric on one side, not enough on the other. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to then work from the top of the hood down rather than from your cut edge up. So if that had happened, I would have just lined up all this first and pinned this first and then pinned in the gusset. Once that is done, we've got one hood. We're going to do the same thing to the other side. Now, if you see, there is a hole. That is where we're going to turn the entire thing like magic right side out when we are done sewing everything together with the machine. There's just a little bit of hand sewing related to this project, and I'm only going to do a quick tutorial on how to do a ladder stitch, but I'm really going to recommend if anyone really wants to see it slowed down, what you're going to want to do is just go look at a YouTube video. There's a million of them. Okay. The side that has the hole in it that I have left open is the side I'm going to make the back. Didn't just sit properly. Let me pin that part. The reason we do that is we just don't want it very, like, in a noticeable place, because if you're not happy with how your ladder stitch is, it might be your first time ever doing hand stitching like that. It's fine. It's fine if it doesn't look perfect, but go ahead and just put it to the back. It doesn't have to be perfect. If it's in the inside back, no one's really going to notice it. It is better to have a finished project than a perfect project, because once you get something finished, you can go on to the next one. Use the skills that you have learned in this project, apply it to another one. Also at 3 yards total for this project. I know it's almost as much yardage as a tunic, but I mean, this class might run an hour total. I mean, that's for an hour and 3 yards of fabric. You can make great gifts. You can make great items for like a tournament and such. So this is a really great project if you are just trying to learn a new skill, work on current skills, or you want to learn something new. I'm all pinned together. Sewing machine back into place. Okay, as I said, we can go ahead and when we're stitching this together, we can work from the bottom edge of our hood down, making sure that we end again right where that corner is. Remember, do not sew over your pins. We like our machines. Okay, so I'm going to be very careful and only sew up to the point. And going back up. Lock my threads in. I'm going to pull this out. Now I'm at the back of a hood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this out, the gusset out, so that I am making sure I do not catch it on the inside in between my long pieces. I am going to sink this in right where the join was, very carefully, and I'm going to only go up a couple of stitches, back up to lock it in, and sew. Okay, that's one side of the inside fabric, and we're going to just do the exact same thing. This time we're not going to close up the back of the long part because this is our hood's opening side. Again, I'm getting to the part where I have it marked. I'm going to be very careful. Only go up to where the stitch is. Lock it in place, pull this out. I've already closed up one side, so no need to close up the other. Okay, great. So we've got something resembling an unfinished hood. We've got an opening, we've got a 3D object, and now we're going to do the other side. Does anyone have any questions while I'm doing the second side? Feel free to ask. Okay, this is the back side, so I'm going to go ahead and close up this side. Pull gusset out. Sink it in right where it joins, and then sew up the back of the hood. And I am, of course, going to lock in my thread like the proper. Okay, one side done. To the other side. Okay, now we finished assembling the inside and outsides of our hood. This is where the magic kind of starts happening. It doesn't matter if you're working with the inside, with your interior or exterior fabric on the outside, but what you're going to want to do is turn one side right side out. And if you ever make pants, you'll be familiar with this kind of technique. You're going to stuff the one that is right side out into the other side that is wrong side out. So you have right sides together. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew closed or hood opening. We're going to attach the front and the back. So what I like to do is I like to align the tops of the hoods first. And I always put, if you look at it, you have your seam allowance. So I've got one side and then the other. I always like to have them leaning one side to one side and the other side to the other side. That way you don't end up with a huge bulk of fabric where you're trying to go over 6 layers of cotton at once. Some sewing machines just are not made to handle 6 layers like that. So I put 2 pins to hold those seam allowances in place. Also, glory of this, you don't have to worry about trimming your threads. So don't worry about that. You don't have to, they're going to be on the inside. Just don't even stress it. Okay, I'm going to kind of shuffle this around. We are now going to go to the bottom of the hood where your chin would go, which is where the 2 gussets meet up. And I'm going to line those up so that the front part is flat. So the gussets, seam allowances are going to the outside, so it's completely flat. I'm going to just put one little pin in to hold those 2 together. And then I'm going to put a couple of pins in to the hood.
Hello, I just want to make just a quick time check because it is 10 minutes, about 10 minutes until the next class. So,
Okay.
so you know, in case you're like, oh no. So there you go.
So yeah, so we're actually very close to being done. The only part that we might end up having to skip out because of that is closing up the backside and YouTube how to do a ladder stitch. That's all you need to do. Okay. I'm going to pop this off so that I have clearance underneath my machine because it's going to help with bunching. Okay, we are going to begin and end from the front. And what you're going to do is you're going to again sink your needle into where that join is. And then you're going to just sew for like 1/4 of an inch directly out. It's going to create a little bit of a flat part when you turn it right side out, but it keeps it from bunching in an unwieldy way, and it lines us up so that when we turn to come up the inside of the hood, you'll be perfectly at your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Don't worry about locking your threads because we're going to go over that part again when we get to the other side. Taking out my pins as I go. I'm just rotating this so the fabric isn't fighting me while I am sewing it. Okay, now the end is in sight. Again, I'm going to make sure everything's nice and flat. There we go. go to the center, rotate again, so you create a little bit of a flat area, and you're done with the hood opening. Now you're going to turn the entirety right side out. It does not matter which side is out, which side is in. Voila. Okay, here is the trick. You can start with the front or the back, does not matter. I like to start with the front. What I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the 2 front gussets, and I'm going to hold each one in my hand. The hood has been turned right side out, and what we're going to do is just pull apart the inside and outside and flip it around. So this is the part, the front side, and the hood is kind of tucked into the center. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pin that real quick. And I'm going to, you're not going to be able to pin the entirety of the outside because this is kind of, it's creating, I like to think of it as a portal. It's creating a little bit of a twist, but it's keeping your fabric, your hood, right side together. And I'm just going to pin one side of this. Just working my way around. And really there's only 2 straight shots through this because you've created a 3D object that has 2 straight sides and the points are in the front and the back. Okay, so I pinned together my seams on one side. I am now going to start sewing down this. You don't need to worry about locking your stitches because you'll just go right over the edge on both sides. Straight line, lining up as I go. Again, we're applying the same principle of the seam allowances should go one way, the other one should go the other. And you're kind of going to have to just rotate this as you go and pull out your next bit of fabric because it's created a little bit of a twist in it, which is totally fine. What you'll end up having is like a bag with the hood on the inside. Here's the thing, is if your corners don't line up when you've sewn across one side, just go all the way to the end and use the shorter side as your seam allowance as the guide. Okay, I went straight off the edge. I'm going to rotate it and start sewing the other side, kind of lock in place and use that as a third hand while I kind of unbunch everything and line up my next side.
Hey, I'm just giving you a 5-minute warning. We do have some people that are coming in for the next class too, so just so you just.
Okay, this is the class I'm sewing, so we'll be okay. Caught my thread. Okay, so I'm coming up to closing this. Do not leave a gap. We've already left a gap on the back side of the interior. So you can just pull it right side out through that. And voila, you're done with your sewing machine. Okay. Find the opening, put your hand through it, and pull your hood out first. That's going to be the tough part. Don't pull too hard, you rip your seam. There we go. And that is it. You now have a hood in desperate need of ironing. You can also use like a pen or something, go through this gap and push out all your little points. Give it a really good iron and then close up the gap with a ladder stitch. Due to time restraints, we're not going to do the ladder stitch today, but this is a hood. And if you have any questions, let me know. As I said, this is going to look like a big piece of fabric that's kind of poofy. Iron it up, it will be great. And then as you can see here, you can put extra decorations over the arms or you can do the front. That's it. Thank you all for coming to my class. If you have any questions, go ahead and message me. I am going to probably hold a class again a couple of weeks. And thank you all for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you for teaching.
Yes, thank you so much for teaching. That was great.
All right, I'm
Okay,
going to
bye.
stop recording now.